Hello, my name's Ed Poole. I'm a member of the Green Party and I'm interviewing candidates for our general executive elections for this summer. And today I'm speaking to Jonathan Kent, who is standing to be external comms coordinator.
That's right.
Hi, Jonathan.
Ed, hi.
Why did you join the Green Party and why do you think other people should?
I joined the Green Party a long time ago, in the 80s when it was a very different thing. And I'd read a book by someone called Kit Pedler called The Quest for Gaia, which had uh, got me thinking a lot about sustainability because it wasn't talked about so much in those days, the way that we were just consuming the planet to death. And so I suppose I came very much out of that green tradition, but um, also with very strong views about inequality and so forth. And I think that this is really the heart of what the Green Party is about, those twin tracks of environmental and social justice. It gets repeated almost to the point of meaninglessness if we're not careful. But you know, when people say that we need to change the way that we live in balance with our environment, our planet, just so we have something left to pass on to our children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. And at the same time, you can't do that on the backs of people who are don't have enough to eat, don't have a roof over their heads, and so on. You have to bring everyone with you. And once you've acknowledged the crisis, or once you've acknowledged the basics of human dignity and our need to bring everybody along, so we don't sacrifice people on some sort of like Pol Pot like road to some putative utopia, which ends up being anything but. If you care about planets and people, the two just go together.
What's your feeling on electoral pacts?
Tricky. If we go back to 2017, I think it was, we tried that with Corbyn's Labour Party and to some extent the Lib Dems, we stepped back from about 30 odd seats. One of them was down here where I am in Sussex, Hastings, which Labour could have won, and Labour didn't bother to blooming well campaign there. They were just focused on Kemp Town, and they didn't reciprocate. And this is the thing with uh, I think particularly the Labour Party, as you as a former member, Ed, will know, it has a very strong cultural imprint. Uh, you could see that way back to the days in the early 20th century when it was, the party of the trade union movement, when it was a very much an increasingly them and us situation between a very large, uh, economically marginal working class and far better off middle class and elites. And there weren't deals to be done, and this kind of like very traditional leftist thing of disliking splitters. So I don't think there's a very strong culture of plays nicely with others in the Labour Party, and I think it's a real problem. And when it comes to electoral reform and having to have the politics of grown up life rather than the playground, it's going to be tricky. I think but some people in the Green Party just feel the Lib Dems are a soft Tories, which I think is a bit rough, but fair enough. I mean, I'm not going to really kind of like dig a ditch to die in over that. But the Lib Dems are kind of much better at playing with others because they've had to do it over the last 30, 40 years. So they're practiced at it. Likewise, the nationalists in Scotland and Wales are much more into collaboration. Labour has an issue with it. But what I always say to people is when it used to be sort of like 20, 30 years ago, we need first past the post. Otherwise, we have these coalition governments like they do in some other countries and nothing gets done. And I'm like, did nobody ever teach you when you were like five that you have to share, that you actually have to work with other people? You don't get to have the whole of the cake, however lovely that would be. And it's very much just like a cake orientated person. I'm all for having all the cake, but we share, right? And somehow there are certain elements of life where this isn't expected. It's got to be, I'm the king of the castle, winner take all. This is what Boris Johnson would have called cakeism, having your cake and eat it. And we know that that was, to use a technical term, complete and utter insert rude word here. And
You,
so
you can swear here, it's all right.
I could, yeah. And so I think, we work with people when we can work with people. And if you look at the way the Greens in Parliament, long had good relationship with people like Clive Lewis and so on, and because there is just similar outlook, and on a personal level, um, people forge connections. It's just the party machines, and particularly the Labour Party machine, that makes that very, very difficult. But ultimately, look, one of the things that I remember the Greens in Germany saying, and I thought was a really good way of looking at things, and this was like about 5 or 6 years ago before they went into this is Robert Habeck, I think, before they went into coalition with the SDP and the FDP, or the Free Democrats. Um, I said, we want to be seen as the adults in the room. And I think actually, if I was positioning the Greens, it would be as the adults in the room. I mean, not an adult with no sense of humor and no sense of fun, but basically the grown-ups. And I think, um, you know, taking that pragmatic, level-headed, human approach to working with other people, man, if you haven't kind of like learned that as a life lesson, perhaps you need to before you go seriously into politics.
How do we make a bigger impact in the media?
Yeah. Now, I've been sort of like wrestling with this one for a long time because I've been a Green since the late 80s and a journalist and comms person since right at the beginning of the 90s. And I did a stint in the BBC's political unit uh, 25 years ago now, very nearly. Not quite, but yeah, getting on for it. And so you're a journalist, you're just like working in radio, so you want to produce a 3 minute package, or you're working in TV, in which case you have a minute and a half, maybe 2.5 minutes if you get to stretch your legs a bit. And how are you going to include clips from four, five, six different political parties in a 2 minute, 3 minute piece? It's really hard. And back then I sensed that just annoyance with the fact that they weren't living in a binary world of just Tories and Labour. And it wasn't so much political bias. I think it was just sheer frustration with the logistics of having to produce a piece which gave everybody's opinion and therefore had no shape and no narrative to it. Uh, but really, these days, there's no excuse because there's lots of online material, podcasts, newspapers can write at length, and so on. So, um, I will say, and I've said in my election statements and in the piece that I wrote for Bright Green, go and have a look at it if you haven't managed to find it and read it. It's great. I liked it. That we have professionalized a lot over the last 5 or 6 years. New generation of people have come into our comms operation, and we've raised our game. But I wrote John Harris wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago in the Guardian, which I quote in the Bright Green piece, saying, the Greens would be soaring ahead from their 10% if their PR wasn't so terrible. So I think we've got to do our bit, our end, and part of what that is that we need to be much clearer about what we're going to talk about, because at the moment we're kind of talking about everything. And if we're going to talk about everything, there's plenty of things that we do want to talk about. We've got to bring it back to two or three simple messages that show where we stand and differentiate us, that actually reflect our values. And I think our values are very inclusive. And I think that putting forward a message of obviously there's the climate crisis message, which a lot of people are extremely worried about, understandably, and a very inclusive social message. I mean, I've suggested talking about no one left behind as an example of how we could bring all sorts of strands together. It doesn't matter whether you're talking economically, socially, legally, and so on. No one left behind because they're fellow citizens or they're living here having claimed asylum, maybe to become a fellow citizen one day. They pay their taxes, right? And if nothing else, that at least should guarantee them, everybody a fair crack. So yeah, so we need clear messages that the media can grapple with, and I think we need to sharpen our operations. The other thing that I would do, and I've said this in my candidate statement, is we need to challenge the broadcasters. We need to challenge the broadcasters about how they decide how much coverage to give to whom, because they have a legal duty to provide balance, right? But the formula is a black box. And actually, I suspect the formula is make it up as they go along for what makes best television and gives them the sort of like what they want. And actually, they want a bit of controversy and they want a bit of of a spectacle, and they get on Nigel Farage because he can be guaranteed to come in with his virtual pint and say all sorts of things that somebody would say down the pub after they'd had about six of them. It's not great for our political culture, but it makes the kind of television that they think attracts viewers. And I think we need to go to Ofcom. If needs be, I think we need to get a judicial review. We need to go in hard and heavy and say, look, you have a duty to provide balance. Show us how you're doing it.
How do we attract non-white members and voters to the Green Party?
I think a lot of that is so I have a real issue with tokenism in organizations where they get a woman on the board or they get um, a person from global majority background to do the, oh, well, it's like, oh, I have a black friend kind of syndrome. And it's it's disheartening, I think, for everyone. So the first thing that we have to do as a party, and I think we're getting increasingly inclusive, but we need to just constantly do a reality check to see if there are barriers to people from certain backgrounds feeling able to get involved. Right. The second thing that we need to do when we find people from underrepresented groups with talent is not a case of just shoving somebody to the front and say, go on. It's like people need support and development. So in terms of communications and media, if we got somebody who's got great potential, but not much experience, then we need to provide training. Then we need to help them with the skills. And, not just people from minorities, but we want to have a whole range of people properly represented. But above all, we need people who are really good at that and can communicate with passion, articulacy, but also really focused. And then when people see themselves in a political party, like people saw Bernie Grant and Diane Abbott in Labour in the 80s, and it's like, well, look, there's a party with people same heritage as me. I have a home there. Increasingly, the Conservatives have got good at promoting people from global majority backgrounds, and there are plenty of people from those heritages who see themselves as part of the Tory party and having a home there. Whether that's their experience when they join, I really don't know. But we've got to be a welcoming home and we've got to nurture talent.
How can the Green Party assure disabled people that we are listening to them?
Constant engagement, really. It's like if we come back to the messaging I was talking about of no one left behind. How can you participate fully if every time you try and access facilities that you have a right to, you can't because they're not set up for you? And it's the same thing with us as a party. It's the kind of it's a bit like with global majority people. I've had friends from different backgrounds say to me, "It's like if you say you don't see my color, you don't see me," and it's like, yeah, exactly. So it's a case of seeing both the somebody has the experiences they've had to bring them to that point in time, as disabled people or any other background where they've faced challenges as a result of that background, and also seeing the whole person and then engaging and then listening and then trying to put yourself in their position. I mean, we've been pretty good at making sure that the brief on disability rights has gone to somebody who lives with disabilities. But if we're actually seeing the whole person rather than just the disabled person and their disabilities, and we've got really talented people, I'd rather have it. Honestly, I'd rather have somebody who was, if we were just having one really outstanding person, great communicator, really charismatic, who happened to be disabled. No, I wouldn't want them to be given the disability brief. I'd want them to be given sort of like a major role in speaking for the party if they were good enough to deserve that. It's about visibility again. And it's about, if we actually have a holistic vision of society where everyone can participate and everybody has an opportunity to live with dignity, but also to realize their full potential, self-actualize, have dreams and see them to fruition, right? Then you can't have that sort of outlook and not have it baked into it that means everybody, that means looking at the barriers that each and every one of us have in our way and some people really battle with. Some people are really held back and remove those bloody obstacles. If that's not a major priority for us, we're not just doing our job, are we?
How should we handle transphobia in the Green Party?
I've wrestled with this one because I had in my local party, we had a member, um, second wave feminist, who, personally I like very much. They had a diagnosis of autism, and but so they were very, very single-mindedly focused on the issue of women's rights vis-a-vis trans women. And I tried engagement. I tried talking to them reasonably. In the end, they were expelled from the party because they came out in support of the Party of Women. And interestingly, when I was doing hustings for last year's general elections as the candidate for Bexhill and Battle, I was sat next to the Reform UK guy who was in all the national papers for having said that we shouldn't have gone to war with Hitler and Nazi Germany in 1938, 39, 1940. And he wasn't the most offensive person on the platform that night. The woman from the Party of Women was, and the language that was used, um, and also with our local member who, I didn't sense it was malice so much as being in an echo chamber where hateful language is used. And this has to get cut both ways. I know people feel passionately about that trans people should be just treated as well as everybody else. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? But again, you can't use the language of hate, even if your opponents are using it, because it just makes any discussion impossible, and it ends up just negating anybody's genuine concerns, and those aren't going to be allayed by a screaming match. So I think my red line for dealing with transphobia, I think we should be able to have a robust debate, and I know which side of that one I'm on. But I think we should be able to have a robust debate. But once you start using language which is designed to belittle, to humiliate, to marginalize. You're not taking part in a constructive debate. There, I don't see there's a place in a political party for people who use the language of hate, and I don't think that's us. So that would be my red line. And I think I know that transphobia and all sorts of prejudice can be a lot more subtle than just using the language of hate, but that's certainly one that's possible to police. And in terms of the more insidious prejudice, I think we just have to be the people who look beyond people's immutable characteristics and constantly look for the person within. So, and that goes for everybody. There's no magic bullet. The prejudice is hard work of every day dealing with the people and, the person in front of you, and support them, listen to them, be there for them.
How important is social and economic class in politics?
Let's separate those two out because this is something about which, and this relates to external communications in as much as it's about the language that we use and the way that we frame things. I struggle with the language of class because it's language borrowed from the 19th century when it described um, a very, very different social situation, and it's been sort of spatchcocked into the situation of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, which are really very different. So just to give an example, and I think this is really worth focusing on. I looked up lately the percentage of wealth in the UK owned by the 1%. And actually, I think if you drill down and look at our wealth tax, it only affects like 0.04 of 1% or something. So four people in 10,000, because there is that much of a concentration of wealth. So it's gone from the top 1% owning about 16% of our wealth in 1991 to 24% of our wealth in 2021, right? And that I think is now past 25%. So we've gone from about £1 in six being owned by the top 1% to one in four. And if that trend continues and we can't tax the wealthy because we're concerned, understandably, people are concerned about capital flight, and it needs sort of like an international framework, I think, to tackle that more effectively in the long run. Then it means the 99% are paying for all the services that we need out of an ever shrinking portion of the pie, which means less and less money. So actually, our taxes go up for the same or worse services because the wealthy, they've got, coming back to cake again, they got way too much cake. And so, how does class apply to a society in which 95% of people have to sell their labor for a living? Because that's really the critical difference. I mean, you've got people in the city who get ridiculous bonuses, but they're still ultimately selling their labor for a living, which is very different than if you own the hedge fund or you own the bank or you own um, just stacks of shares so you can live off interest on your capital sort of thing. So putting up dividing lines just on the basis of where you are in that, because some people are doing all right out of it and some people really aren't. But dividing one from the other rather than just showing how the whole system is rigged for a very, very, very small number of people to benefit from, I think is potentially counterproductive. And I prefer building a bigger us. And I want to build a bigger us, and I want our language to project that we want to build a bigger us. And this, again, arbitrarily, but coming back to no one left behind. That means people in parts of the country that have deindustrialized and that haven't replaced jobs. That means people from particular minorities who need additional support, who face additional barriers. That means the economically marginal, means anybody who faces discrimination. It just means everyone should get a chance to participate and thrive in what is basically a very wealthy society. It's just we have a distribution problem. And, at the same time, we don't framing this as some kind of class war. And I'm not saying that you're suggesting that, but there are those who just want to be the person with the flag on top of the barricades, and fair enough. It's romantic. It's just a lot of people. It's like the guy at the 2019 election on Newsnight. Labour said they were going to raise taxes on the top 5%, and and that's everybody over £80,000. And there was a guy in the audience who was like making more than £80,000 a year and absolutely refused to believe that put him in the top 5%. So you said people, you kind of want to tax multimillionaires more, right? You've got more than 10 million quid. Well, on your 10 million between 10 and 20 million, we want 1 or 2%, right? 100, £200,000 a year, but you've got 20 million quid. So you'll make more than that in interest on that, quite probably. But you'll get all sorts of people go, well, that's me. And it's not. And they'll never have that money and they'll never get taxed, but they still identify with it. So again, we've got to change. I think we've got to change the way that we frame this. And we need to stop talking about taxes as some kind of punishment. Taxes are a civic duty. There was this guy I remember hearing on the radio years ago talking about, he was Swedish. In Sweden, they have quite a strong buy-in into democracy. And he was asked about taxes and stuff. He said, I know, but the state taxes to pay for things because the state is us. Yeah. And if we get back to say where the state is us, it's like a flipping great Groupon, right? You all get together online, you buy that holiday or you buy that shirt or whatever with 30 other people come together. Well, we do that on a million, 50, 60, 70 million strong basis to buy better healthcare. That's what we do with the NHS. It's like the world's biggest Groupon. It's flipping fantastic. And, we could cough up a bit more and do even better. We do that for education. We do that for defense. We do that for policing, all sorts of things which people don't argue that we should do together. And all we're saying to the people who are extremely wealthy is, you know, it's time you gave back to the country that gave to you. It's the patriotic thing to do. And what's more, the subtext is if you want to buy into a country or bail out of a country by not paying your taxes and that country splinters and stuff, then what have you got? You don't get to enjoy your nice golf club, do you? Because there aren't nice golf clubs in a country in a state of turmoil. You push it too far, and that's what happens. And if you look back in history, whether it's the end of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the French Ancien regime, or what have you, the people in power, the people in these bubbles of privilege, the writing on the wall is just never big enough. And then when it reaches a tipping point, and how many of us saw the 2011 riots coming? How many of us saw the Southport riots coming last year? Things go like that. and it gets out of hand. And then everybody's really shocked and say, oh, how could that happen? Well, it's like you weren't paying attention because you were on your yacht while people were not having enough to eat, right? If you've been a little bit less greedy and paid in and made sure that everybody is doing well, you'd still be able to enjoy a lot of fruits of the good life, rather than us having to deal with social chaos. I mean, they've got reasons that, it's like billionaires building bunkers in Hawaii to evade the climate crisis. Yeah, well, good luck with that. That's really you're gonna be in your bunker. You're gonna come out to a dead planet after 200 years with your descendants, or your descendants gonna come out. Yeah, yeah, terrific. The planet we have right now would have been a bit nicer, huh?
Like, I'd personally, I'd happily pay an extra £20 a month in taxes to not have my 82-year-old dad wait 8 hours in A&E after he's taken a tumble.
Yeah, well, who bloody wouldn't? I mean, yeah, honestly, it's yeah, a lot of people on the right love the great man, and it was men in there. Great man interpretation of history. And yeah, there are people who act as catalysts, but I always go with it sort of like the tinder and the spark view of history. It's like if somebody comes along and lights the spark, the tinder's got to be there, right? The really amazing things that we have done as a civilization or civilizations are collective achievements. They're very, very rarely the achievements of just one person. When people are now investigating the building of the pyramids, more and more the evidence is leaning towards the fact that this was much more of a community endeavor. The people got a sense of identity. It wasn't people being whipped and stuff. That seems to be the latest thinking. And I think the NHS, people, it's like Americans, who think that we got death committees and somehow pay into some forced to pay into the health service. I point out to them, look, you guys, Second World War, there were 6 American casualties on the continental United States as a result of enemy action in the Second World War. We had a September the 11th every 2 weeks for 8 months, as our cities were bombed. And after that war, people wanted to make sure that a nation that had gone through hell together went into the future together. And we did it collectively. We built the welfare state and the NHS as a monument to a generation that gave its all to stand for the values that we believe in, right? We do great things together. I think people are really alive to that. And I don't think that when you frame things in those terms, that those people who wrap themselves in the flag and try and convince us that somehow this is nothing to do with our values are so wrong. We're a nation that comes together in adversity, and I think, we're facing adversity now.
What other issues are important to you?
Well, I think I managed to cover a lot in terms of let me talk about the post, because I think this is really important, because what I think it shouldn't be is the opportunity. I mean, obviously, you will have gathered I have my views, and there are things that get me going, and so on. And I would imagine those are things that get most people in the Green Party going. But it's not a role which should be used to dictate our communications. And that's really important. So I did a review of the Green Party's comms back in 2010, 2011, something like that, when they were, again, we had very much more of a system there where the most prized quality was activism rather than skills that lent themselves to a particular role. Now, we have an increasingly professional team in our headquarters with real experience in media and communications. And I think to work with professionals, it really helps to know your stuff. Now, I've worked in media and communications for 35 years. So I've worked in local newspapers, I've worked in local radio, I've worked in network radio, television. I've been a political reporter, a foreign correspondent. I've done communications and PR for a wide range of organizations from UNDP and Heifer International, the international NGO supporting smallholder farmers across the world. Particularly, I was working with them in Africa, um, uh, looking after helping them with their communications. Lots of startups and technology companies. It's a skill, right? And so in this role, I would very much be working with our comms team to make sure they have the support they need, see where they're lacking capacity, see where they could, there's the possibility they could benefit from skills transfer, so on. And acting as a conduit between the comms team, leadership, GPEX obviously, and the party, which means keeping one's finger on the pulse, but also using 35 years of experience to make sure that we are framing messages that are consistent and that are cutting through and that are easily understood. Because I'll say this again and again, and this was a point I heard Dominic Sandbrook make on one of the popular political podcasts a while back, is one of the things that activists get wrong and get most wrong is they cannot fathom how incredibly uninterested in politics lots of people are. I'd say most people, but there are levels of interest. And the Trump campaign targeted what they call low information voters. Yeah. And Reform are following their playbook. Now, those people um, are not necessarily green voters, but they're not necessarily not. So we need to make sure that our messaging is both consistent and works at multiple levels, depending on how involved people want to get. If people vote just on a slogan and that's the totality of their involvement in politics, make sure that we have a slogan that grabs their attention, right? One that unpacks for people who want to pay more attention. Again, I'm just using it as an example because people may think of better ones. No One Left Behind. We can use that to talk about trans people. We could talk about Nowhere Left Behind. We could use that to talk about the areas of the Midlands, Northeast, Northwest, um, Wales, parts of Wales that have been bypassed post 1980s, Cornwall, other places, the coasts of places like Kent and Sussex, where you have pockets of poverty amongst considerable wealth. It could be focused anywhere, on any region, on any group of people, and on all of us. Yeah. So building messaging that is robust like that, that cuts through, that um, is flexible enough to flex with us, that ties everything that we're talking about together. I mean, that's going to be really vitally important. And I think that really benefits from having experience of how big organizations do that successfully. And having been both in a newsroom for many years and knowing how news lands, and having been the other side of the fence and knowing how you create messages that you know are going to land with your audience and so on, that's really super important. Another thing I've been doing recently, and I may end up working with these guys because they've got something really terrific, and that's um, new ways of using social media. Because there are platforms, this one in particular, uh, that's built by some guys I know, that allows micro targeting by geography and to a great extent actually by demographic as well. So you can put in pretty much individual postcodes, so your messages can go out just to people in a division, in a ward, in a constituency, in a county. And this is paid for. So you're using paid channels just like you would Facebook advertising. But, Facebook, you're using messaging within a mile or 5 mile radius or 25 or whatever. But we don't live in a world of round constituencies, right? And there's a lot of wastage. And we're not a party with the resources to waste advertising spend going to areas which aren't voting or aren't voting for the candidate that we're promoting or whatever it happens to be. So technology like that will play a huge role, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years. We can use that to good effect. And it doesn't actually, it's good for us. There's no upfront costs involved or anything. There's no licensing fee. It's just pay as you go for the advertising you use, a bit like with other social media advertising, things like that. Um, we're getting really pretty good, I think, at using social media. Keep that going, but again, ideally, we keep things within a particular framework so everything ties back to a central message rather than we just hit people with a blizzard of green memes and stuff. Because otherwise, people who aren't paying minute attention is like, what does the green stand for? We should make it easy for people to know what we stand for. We have a planet in crisis. We have a country which sections of the population are really, really struggling, and it's our mission to sort that out.